Hey Wargamers, today we're going to talk about Tau Hammerheads. They're one of the oldest units in the Codex, and they've gone through multiple different iterations over the years, and this iteration is probably one of the better ones. So we're going to talk about how to use it, its strengths, its weaknesses, and what types of seps you might want to use it with and everything like that. So before we do that, I want to say thanks for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button and the subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you don't miss any upcoming videos. All right, so we're going to be working out of the new Tau Codex, and of course we're talking about this guy, shoop, the Hammerhead. Yeah, so overall, Hammerheads are pretty good damage dealers for high toughness targets. They are fairly usable in that capacity, but they lack a lot of the strengths that make other things like Riptides appealing because they don't have saver protocols or anything like that. They are just tanks, and so you have to keep that in mind. Similarly, they have a caveat where you almost always want to pair them with Longstrike, which is the HQ Hammerhead. He's a special character, and because of that, you are going to almost always want to take them as Tau Sept. Now we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but Longstrike is Tau Sept, and so that kind of puts some restrictions on when and where you're going to be using Hammerheads. Additionally, I'm not going to talk about Longstrike in detail here. It's pretty much the same as it was before the Codex release. So if you haven't seen my original index version of this review, go ahead, check it out in the description below, and you can get the gist on Longstrike from that. I will say the main thing that's different with Longstrike is that he has his new battle suit, which makes him a little bit easier to use, but it's not a fundamental change to how he functions. So check out that video if you want more on Longstrike. All right, so let's start with what a Hammerhead is, its profile, everything like that. So Hammerheads have movement 12 at full wounds, weapon skill 6, ballistic skill 3 up. One of the few units that actually has a better than 4 up ballistic skill to start with. So that's a huge source of their power right there, is just that increased ability to hit, which gets better with Longstrike. If you have Longstrike, you get +1 to hit in the shooting phase with Hammerheads within 6 inches. So you're almost always going to be taking that. So in general, you can think of Hammerheads as just having this 2-up if you have Longstrike on the table with them. So a 2-up to hit is certainly very nice. Strength 6, toughness 7, 13 wounds, 3 attacks in close combat, not that we really care about that. Leadership 8, again, not that we care about it. They're single model units, so not a huge deal there. And then a save of 3 up. So they're fairly durable, but you'll notice there's no type of invulnerable save, anything like that. They are fairly easy to kill if you get up close or have any type of heavy weapons shooting at you. So las cannons, fusion, melta, anything like that is going to make quick work of Hammerheads, and that is something to keep in mind. All right, so a unit contains 1 Hammerhead. You have the option of taking a couple different primary guns. The kind of iconic Tau weapon is the railgun. Railguns have 2 different firing modes. The solid shot is generally what people are thinking of when they're talking about a railgun. Range 72, heavy 1, strength 10, -4 AP, D6 damage. And then if you roll a 6+ to wound, then you inflict an additional D3 mortal wounds. And so this has some play with things in the Tau Sept, and particularly focus fire. If you can improve your ability to wound, suddenly you're getting a better chance of getting those mortal wounds off. So if you can move that 6 up to a 5 up using focus fire, for example, then you're getting a lot more bang for your buck, but it's still a situational thing. You also have the option of firing that as a submunition shot, which is heavy D6, strength 6, -1 AP, and 1 damage each. This is a nice component for the railgun because you might run up against an army that you don't really need that solid shot as much, and so you are able to utilize this to some extent. But overall, this is a pretty suboptimal choice. In comparison, we also have the ion cannon. The ion cannon is your alternative option. That's range 60 inches, so a little bit shorter range, but let's face it, 60 inches is plenty in almost every game, unless you're playing like Apocalypse or something like that. 60 inches, 72 inches doesn't really make a big difference. The standard shot is heavy 3. It is strength 7, minus 2 AP and 2 damage each. You can also overcharge that for heavy D6, strength 8, minus 2, 3 damage each. And then if you roll 1 or more hit rolls of 1, you suffer a mortal wound. So, you know, there's some drawback to that, but in a lot of cases, you're going to be looking for that overcharge. And so a lot of times you're going to actually, you know, risk rolling on a 1 and you know, just go for that higher strength. The minus, or the mortal wound on a 1 to hit is easily countered by just putting a marker light out. So a lot of times you're going to have a marker light available, and it's going to make this a much more reliable weapon and also save you the pain of those mortal wounds. So overall, a very strong choice. And so if we're looking at our options here about which of the two we're going to take, I'm going to strongly encourage you to take the ion cannon. And if we look at the numbers, it breaks out in that way as well. The ion cannon, regardless of target, is almost always more points efficient than the railgun. And so it's a strong choice both in terms of numbers, but also the flexibility it brings. You have these nice high power shots that are going to be good against pretty much any target. And you have a little bit of flexibility in terms of if you fire a standard or overcharge, but regardless, this is a solid weapon that's going to do a lot of work for you. And so ion cannon is certainly the stronger choice in my opinion than the railgun. All right, for your secondary weapon, you have 3 different options. You can either take 2 burst cannons, 2 gun drones, or 2 smart missile systems, and they are all roughly the same points. You know, it's about 2 or 3 points difference between each of those. And yeah, I think there's a few different strengths that you can play to here. One is that gun drones are going to be able to detach. If they detach, then you have more drones in your list. They can use things like fire blades, volley fire ability. They can soak wounds for nearby battle suits or infantry. Of course, they can't soak wounds for the Hammerhead itself, but they have a lot of different tactical flexibility there. So gun drones are a solid choice, barring anything else. However, the more offensive choice is going to be something like the smart missile system. Smart missile system has a long range, much longer than either the gun drone or the burst cannon. Also does not require line of sight, ignores cover, and so this is something that can do a lot of work for you and is a really nice secondary weapon to take on a Hammerhead. Now the trade-off here is that it's a little bit more expensive, but I think the smart missile system is the better choice in a lot of situations. Unless you're hurting for gun drones, then go ahead, take gun drones. That's another way to get some more drones in your list. I wouldn't really take the burst cannon. I think the burst cannons are, the worst of those 3 choices. So right now we're looking at ion cannons with smart missile systems as a really standard basic loadout for your Hammerhead. The third option you have is to take a couple different seeker missiles, or a couple seeker missiles on your Hammerhead. And if you've watch this channel, you know that I think seeker missiles are a pretty good deal overall, especially when we pair this with a few marker lights and long strike. We're having seeker missiles that are hitting on 2s, and that's a lot of damage, a lot of reliable damage that can really make a difference if you're bringing multiple Hammerheads with multiple seeker missiles. If you're bringing one Hammerhead, which I wouldn't recommend, just bringing one standard Hammerhead, I would almost always recommend bringing long strike and more Hammerheads if you are going to be bringing Hammerheads at all, or just taking long strike, either of those. But if you do just bring one Hammerhead, probably not going to make a big difference by putting 1 or 2 seeker missiles on it. If you're bringing 3 Hammerheads, 6 seeker missiles can certainly make a difference. So I think that's a pretty good point investment if you are going Hammerhead heavy in your list. So we got the loadout set aside. We're doing ion cannons, we're doing smart missile systems, we're maybe doing seeker missiles. What sept should you take? Well, at the beginning I said you are almost always going to be taking Hammerheads with long strike. And so the default there is going to be the Tau sept that allows you to, fire Overwatch on 5s. But the thing about Hammerheads is that they don't have the for the greater good special ability. So that doesn't really make a big difference for them. Long strike does have for the greater good though, so there's that. But really what you're going to be using the sept for here is the focus fire stratagem. That's going to allow you to add 1 to wound on a target that's already been wounded by a Tau Sept unit. So let's say you take Long Strike, he could have a railgun, sure, why not? He wounds something that's big and nasty. Let's say one of these new Knight models is on the table and Long Strike lands a blow. All of a sudden, you can spend a few command points and have all your ion cannons have +1 to wound. That's not a negligible effect. That's a huge effect. It also is very good for things like, you know, fire warriors and stuff too, but your hammerheads are going to be able to leverage this +1 to wound to really make a difference against these super high toughness targets. You also could go with the Sakia Sept. You know, there's some value there in that you're being able to re-roll misses, or 1 miss per unit. But again, I think having Long Strike in your list is going to be the more reliable and generally more useful option, and so you're going to go with the Tau Sept if you're bringing hammerheads. Is the hammerhead worth bringing overall? We've been talking about what you want to do in terms of, you know, within the hammerhead selection, there's railguns or ion cannons, smart missile systems or gun drones. But if we're comparing hammerheads to other units in the Codex here, is it worth it? And there's kind of a few different things we have to look at. So let's just take a numbers perspective on it. If we're looking at the point efficiency of hammerheads versus kind of my MVP, the heavy burst cannon Riptide, there's actually a niche for hammerheads. Hammerheads are more point efficient at taking out toughness 6 or higher models than heavy burst cannon Riptides. So for that reason, hammerheads can be part of a you know, heavy armor anti-tank strategy. You can use them in a way that's going to shore up your base in terms of taking out heavy targets. The flip side of that is that, again, hammerheads are not as flexible as Riptides. They don't have the movement, they don't have the invulnerable save, they don't have the general purpose weapons. Riptides are actually better at killing things that are toughness 5 or lower, which there are plenty of, and they can't take savior protocols like Riptides can. So you really have to balance this kind of glass cannon approach versus the durability and flexibility offered to you by Riptide. Now, certainly with the rule of 3, there's plenty of room to take both, right? So you could take your 3 Riptides, you could take some hammerheads. That's going to be a pretty beefy list, just like it is, but you can certainly do it. And that's going to be a really effective anti-armor list. You know, overall, I think most people are going to be focused more on Riptides than on hammerheads. I've seen some competitive lists with a lot of hammerheads in them, and they certainly do work in certain contexts, but I think the more, you know, viable or more generalist approach of the Riptide is going to pay off more often, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't include any hammerheads in your list. I think hammerheads bring a lot to the table. So the answer there is should you bring a hammerhead? If you have the points, absolutely. And if you do, bring it as Long Strike. Bring Long Strike and a friend or two. But if you are, you know, not playing Tau Sept, then hammerheads might not be the best choice for you. If you're not playing Tau Sept, then maybe go with Riptides instead. Load up on infantry or other units that play more to the strengths of that Sept. Hammerheads are really something that you see primarily with a Tau Sept detachment, and for that reason, you know, you have to see what you're working with to make that decision about whether or not hammerheads fit in your army. But I will say they are strong offensive units, although they do suffer some durability issues. So, in a nutshell, I like hammerheads. Hopefully this video was informative to you. Let me know what your experience is with hammerheads in the comments below. Do you use them all the time? Do you never use them? Why or why not? And as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, this video was made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you also enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Special thanks to Max Harrison, NoExcusesPanda, Paul Lueders, TauOswell, Nick Steele, Jared Egeler, Brian Mann, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Cristofer Sarale, Youhei Penguin, Andy M. Young, Peter Benjamin Parker, and Giovanni DiMaggio.